Compassion is the act of opening your heart. To live in a state of compassion means you approach the world with your emotional barriers lowered and your ability to connect with others intact. Compassion is the emotional glue that keeps you rooted in the universality of the human experience, as it connects you to your essence and to the essence of those around you. We do not all walk around with our hearts wide open all the time. However, doing so would leave us overwhelmed and in emotional danger. If I kept my heart open and exposed while watching the 6 o'clock news every night, I would most likely never recover from the rush of helpless and hopeless feelings created by all the tragic stories. Sometimes it is necessary to keep your emotional barriers up as a way to protect yourself. The key to learning the lesson of compassion is realizing that you are in control of the erection or destruction of those barriers that create distance between you and others. You can choose to dissolve those barriers when you want to connect with the heart of another human being. You can also choose to limit others' access to your heart when you need to by forming judgments that separate you from that which you are judging. Judgments are not always negative. Your judgments are what keep you from walking around like an open membrane, open and exposed to whatever information you come in contact with. At times, your judgment serve to help you decide what beliefs and thoughts you choose to let in from the outside world and help you discern what is true for you. Without your sense of judgment, you would be bombarded with hundreds of conflicting ideas over which you would have no power to discriminate. At other times, however, your judgments can limit you and prevent you from being compassionate when and where that is needed. When your judgments become more overpowering than your ability to practice empathy, you separate yourself from your own human essence. You put yourself into a box of self-righteousness and seal yourself off from your innate need to connect with other people. You may feel superior to those you are judging, but you may also feel the chill of loneliness imposed by your isolation. Only antidote to rich judgment is compassion. The secret to learning to open your heart is the willingness to connect to your essence and the essence of the person you are judging. From there, the magic of compassion opens limitless doors to human connection. In order to learn the lesson of compassion, you will first need to recognize when you have become trapped by your limiting judgments. The best way to do this is to pay attention to your breathing. If your breathing feels shallow or tight, you are most likely trapped in a judgment that needs to be released. Your conscious mind can also help identify when compassion is called for. Chances are, if you are able to pause in the middle of making a judgment long enough to consider compassion, then compassion is required. You would not have entertained the thought otherwise. As you learn in Rule 2, you have the ability to choose whether or not you will learn the lessons you are presented with. So when you will then need to use your discretion to choose whether to invite in compassion. Chances are, if you're able to pause in the middle of making a judgment long enough to consider compassion, then compassion is required. You would not have entertained the thought otherwise. As you learned in Rule 2, you have the ability to choose whether or not you will learn the lessons you are presented with. So you will then need to use your discretion to choose whether to invite in compassion or remain closed. If you choose compassion, then you need to move the judgment from its position in your mind down into the emotional realm of your heart. It is there that you can try on what it would feel like to be that person you are judging, and imagine putting yourself in her reality. This will connect you to her essence and evaporate the judgment encrusted around your heart. A story that my friend Nikki told me about how she learned the lesson of compassion is one of the most powerful examples of human kindness I've ever heard. As a child, Nikki and her friend were molested on their way home from school by a man in a brown car. Nikki memorized the license plate of that brown car and told the police, who captured the offender and arrested him. Nikki remained deeply troubled by that incident for many years. As an adult, Nikki became a social worker. She never quite forgot that episode from her childhood, and so she had a particular softness for victims of child abuse and molestation. One day, she was given the case of a sex offender who needed rehabilitation. Much to Nikki's horror, it was the man in the brown car, still committing these acts 15 years later. Nikki's mind immediately flooded with judgments. She recalled the shame and anger she felt all those years ago, and something close to hatred toward this man rose up in her. She still had difficulty believing that anyone could commit such a heinous act. She had no intention of doing anything to help the man who was responsible for her terrible memories. In the midst of her judgments, Nikki realized one important fact, that this man was deeply troubled and needed to be helped. Though it was one of the most difficult decisions she ever made, Nikki chose to allow her heart to open to this man and assist him with his recovery. She got in touch with a part of her that knew that everyone, including herself, was capable of committing inappropriate acts at times. By connecting to her essence, she allowed herself to imagine the pain this man must have been in that caused him to behave the way he did. It was by imagining herself in his reality that she was able to release her judgments and move into compassion. Compassion is also required to those times when you are harshly judging yourself. If you have made what you perceive to be a mistake, behaved in some way of which you are not proud, or failed to live up to your own expectations, you will most likely put up a barrier between your essence and the part of you that is alleged wrongdoer. By doing this, you create a chasm wide enough to hold some severely self-critical thoughts. Such a barrier is no less restrictive or destructive than one that divides you from other people. At those times, you will need to consciously open your heart to yourself and show compassion. Compassion will then open the door to the possibility of forgiveness and will allow you to release those judgments that are holding you in self-contempt. What judgments do you need to transcend to learn the lesson of compassion? Forgiveness. To err is human, to forgive divine. Alexander Pope. Forgiveness is the act of erasing an emotional debt. As you move from compassion to forgiveness, your heart is already open engage in a conscious and deliberate release of resentment. Perceiving past actions as mistakes implies guilt and blame, and it is not possible to learn anything meaningful while you're engaged in blaming. There are 4 kinds of forgiveness. The first is beginner forgiveness for yourself. Not long ago, I got lost on the New York subway. I was late for a meeting with a friend, causing her to wait for me in the freezing rain for nearly an hour. I felt absolutely terrible and was on the verge of beating myself up. When I boarded yet another train to try to reach my destination, I finally realized that I was doing the very best I could under the circumstances. I remember the value of extending compassion toward myself and made amends by sincerely apologizing when I reached my friend. I then realized the situation. The second kind of forgiveness is beginner forgiveness for another. This is where you need to forgive someone for a moderate transgression. For instance, my friend who had to wait for me in the rain could have been really upset and held a grudge, but instead of harboring resentment, she graciously accepted my apology, and we repaired the temporary rift. When I asked her to tell me how she forgave me so quickly, she said she knew I didn't intend to make her wait. She herself had been lost in the subway in the past and identified with my situation. Though she was initially annoyed, she recognized that staying angry would only waste her energy and cause me more guilt. She chose to forgive me instead. You may resist learning this lesson because sometimes it feels good to blame people for their mistakes. It makes you feel superior and righteous when you can look down on your nose and hold a grudge towards someone who has wronged you. However, harboring resentment consumes a lot of energy. Why waste valuable energy on prolonged anger and guilt when you could use that energy for far greater things? You let go of resentment, guilt, and anger, you become revitalized and create space in your soul for growth. The third kind of forgiveness is advanced forgiveness of yourself. This is for serious transgressions, the ones you carry with deep shame. When you do something that violates your own values and ethics, you create a chasm between your standards and your actual behavior, which compromises your integrity. You need to work very hard at forgiving yourself for these deeds so that you can close this chasm and realign with the best part of yourself. I am not saying that you should drown out the voice of your conscience by rushing to forgive yourself or not feeling regret or remorse, but wallowing in these feelings for a protracted period of time is not healthy. Continuing to punish yourself only creates a bigger gap between you and your ethics, and the bigger that gap, the greater the chance that you will repeat the unacceptable behavior. Remember, your conscience is not your enemy. mortgage, broker's license, and eventually she started her own business. Margot now feels a sense of real accomplishment since the business is thriving. Though she still feels sad about the loss of her husband, she no longer carries around the intense hatred that controlled her for so long. Margot was finally able to forgive her husband when she shifted out of victimhood and forced herself to see the bigger picture. She was able to shift the focus away from her anger onto seeing the opportunity for growth in the present situation. In hindsight, she can finally view the entire event as a valuable learning experience. After all, without this apparent tragedy, she might never have come into her own power and learned advanced forgiveness. So again, here are the 4 kinds of forgiveness and how you can master each one. Beginning forgiveness of yourself. Be compassionate toward yourself for doing the best you could with the resources you had at the time. Make amends and then release the situation. 2. Beginning forgiveness of another. Identify with that person's motivation so you can understand why she did what she did. Show compassion, then release it. 3. Advanced forgiveness of yourself. Understand why you did what you did. Make amends as best as you can, then find it in your heart to absolve yourself. 4. Advanced forgiveness of another. Allow yourself to fully feel the hurt or anger so that you can release it, then view the situation as a necessary part of your path of spiritual evolution. Ethics. There are no mistakes, no coincidences. All events are blessings given to us to learn from. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So you made what you perceived to be a mistake. You eventually forgave yourself, made amends, and released the situation from your mind. You will still be left with one lingering lesson: the importance of ethics. Morality is conforming to the established standards of right and wrong that have been set by the society in which you live. But ethical codes are not universal. There is no one set of guidelines. That works for everyone around the world, since what we may consider morally wrong in one culture might be acceptable in another. For some, ethics are defined by religious laws. For others, moral codes arise from lessons learned in school or from parents. Most people in our culture were raised with the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. At its most basic, ethics involves choosing right or good behavior in your relationships with others. You are constantly strengthening your ability to choose between right or wrong. While we have basic ethics instilled in us and know what is right and what is wrong in our hearts, life throws many situations at us where what is right is not always apparent. Life is complicated and full of gray areas. Each and every situation you find yourself in forces you to choose between the two. For example, when you were in school and may have questioned whether it was right or wrong to let your friend cheat off you on a test. Your friend may have been unprepared for the test because she was having troubles at home. You knew it was wrong to let her cheat, but if you didn't, she would have failed the test and had even more problems to deal with. When your external actions reflect your internal code, you are in alignment with your morality. This is how an individual gains integrity. Integrity actually behaved. You will most likely experience feelings of guilt or remorse that will serve as a clue to you that the lesson of ethics needs to be learned. Whether or not you are discovered and punished for wrong behavior does not matter. You will instinctually know that you behaved wrongly. You may have only yourself to answer to, but isn't your conscience a powerful teacher if you listen to it? Antonio dearly loved his wife Cynthia. He was a devoted husband, and their life was truly blessed with harmony and compatibility. One weekend, while they were away at a wedding for some close friends, something happened that threatened their idyllic life. Antonio found himself lusting after Cynthia's friend, Vivian, and unable to contain his attraction, leaned over and kissed Vivian while the two were alone in the elevator in the hotel. Vivian returned his kiss, and they stood there pressed up against the wall with their arms around each other for several moments. Then suddenly, as if cold water were thrown on him, Antonio abruptly came to his senses, pulled away, and exclaimed, "What am I doing? I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I have always been attracted to you, but this isn't right. I'm very sorry." Without hesitation, they agreed to dismiss the encounter as if it never happened. They exited the elevator and went back to their respective rooms. Antonio was devastated. How could he have done such a thing? He wondered to himself. He knew he loved Cynthia more than anything in the world, and he was horrified by his actions. Riddled with shame and self-disgust, Antonio spent the rest of the weekend stewing. Sunday night in the airport, as they waited for their plane home, Antonio was still tormented by guilt. The internal schism he had created between his ethics and his actions plagued his conscience, and he could not look his beloved wife in the eye. He finally decided to confess to her, knowing that although the truth could destroy his marriage and radically alter his entire life, he needed to be honest with Cynthia. After telling her what had happened, he apologized profusely for his behavior and begged for her forgiveness. Cynthia was shocked, hurt, and angry. After taking some time to sort out her feelings, however, she was able to find the forgiveness in her heart to release the event and absolve Antonio of his transgressions. They were both relieved that their relationship had a solid enough foundation to withstand this test. Although Cynthia's forgiveness made Antonio's heart ache a little less, he still needed to live with the eternal repercussions of his lack of integrity. He had violated his own ethics, and even though he made amends for the wrong he had caused, he would eventually need to forgive himself so that the gap between his ethics and his actions could close, and he could be free from his shame and guilt. Over time, Antonio did, in fact, release the guilt, but the memory of how horrible he felt that night in the airport stayed to remind him to not stray again from his own ethics. Humor. It is of immense importance to learn to laugh at ourselves. Catherine Mansfield. The lesson of humor means learning to invite levity and amusement into situations that might otherwise be disastrous. If you're going to feel the hardships that happen to you or the slip-ups you make as lessons rather than mistakes, a sense of humor will prove helpful. When you learn to laugh at your mishaps, you are able to instantaneously transform perceived bad situations your own. Humor and laughter are also tremendously important in relationships. Sharing a good laugh with someone does wonders. A friend of mine told me that once when she and her husband were having a disagreement, he made a face that struck her as so comical, she burst out laughing. They both realized how silly they were being, and they were able to share a laugh and resolve their conflict with a new perspective. As Victor Borge said, laughter is the closest distance between two people. The health benefits, both mental and physical, of humor are well documented. Good laugh can diffuse tension, relieve stress, and release endorphins into your system, which act as a natural mood elevator. In Norman Cousins' book, Anatomy of an Illness, Cousins describes the regimen he followed to overcome a serious, debilitating disease he was suffering from. It included large doses of laughter and humor. Published in 1976, his book has been widely read and accepted by the medical community. Laughter causes misery to vanish. It teaches you to lighten up and take yourself less seriously, even in the most serious of situations. It can also help you gain some much needed perspective. A young woman named Alyssa spent close to a year planning her wedding. She and her fiance invited over 300 guests to what was to be a lavish, formal affair in a beautiful banquet hall. She wanted it to be perfect, so she paid close attention to every last detail, right down to the cocktail napkins. Big day came and everything went brilliantly until the very expensive wedding cake was rolled out. A wheel of the table got caught on a wire and the cake went flying through the air, finally landing in a big chocolate and icing splattered mess on the dance floor. All the guests held their breath as they looked at Alyssa, expecting her to burst into tears. Much to everyone's surprise, she looked down at the cake, started to laugh, and joked, "Hey, I ordered a vanilla cake." So give yourself permission to laugh. You'll be amazed at how quickly a crisis can turn into a comedy when you invite in humor. A lesson is repeated until learned. Lessons will be repeated to you in various forms until you have learned them. When you have learned them, you can then go on to the next lesson. Have you ever noticed that lessons tend to repeat themselves? Does it seem as if you married or dated the same person several times in different bodies with different names? Have you run into the same type of boss over and over again? Do you find yourself having the same problem with many different coworkers? Several years ago, Bill Murray starred in a movie called Groundhog Day, in which he woke up in the same day over and over until he learned all the lessons he needed to in that one day. The same events kept repeating themselves until he finally got what it was he was supposed to do in each one. Does this strike a funny but familiar chord with you? Lessons will be repeated until learned. When I taught high school, I always told my students, if you don't deal well with authority figures at home, then you will have an opportunity to deal with them out in the world. You will continually draw into your life people who need to enforce authority, and you will struggle with them until you learn the lesson of obedience. Teenagers often perceive their parents as overly strict. At the age of 14, Much to her surprise, she found teachers and staff with the same rules that her mother had laid down at home and that I had at school. She finally understood. In couples counseling, it is often noted that people who divorce and remarry nearly always marry the same type of person they just left. Similarly, a friend of mine named Cassidy, who was a compulsive perfectionist, had a knack for attracting inappropriate men. It was no coincidence that Cassidy, to whom mismatched socks were a horror and a torn shirt a federal offense, repeatedly drew men into her life who dressed like slobs. She was a stickler for manners, yet her most recent boyfriend held a spoon like Fred Flintstone, a drumstick. Only recently did Cassidy begin to acknowledge that perhaps these men were appearing in her life as teachers and opportunities to work out her perfectionist issue. You will continually attract the same lesson into your life. You will also draw to you teachers to teach you that lesson until you get it right. The only way you can free yourself of difficult patterns and issues you tend to repeat is by shifting your perspective so that you can recognize the patterns and learn the lessons that they offer. You may try to avoid the situations, but they will eventually catch up with you. To face these challenges means you need to accept the fact that something within you keeps drawing you to the same kind of person or issue. Painful though that situation or relationship may be, the words of Carl Jung, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And come to consciousness you must if you are ever to stop repeating the same lessons and be able to move on to new ones. The challenge of Rule 4 is to identify and release the patterns that you are repeating. As any good facilitator or therapist will tell you, this is no easy task since it means you have to change, and change is not always easy. Staying just as you are may not help you advance spiritually, but it certainly is comfortable in its familiarity. You grooved your patterns a long time ago as a way of protecting yourself. Moving into unfamiliar new behavior can be uncomfortable, not to mention at times frightening. Rising to the challenge of identifying and releasing your patterns forces you to admit that the way you have been doing things isn't working. The good news is that by identifying and releasing the pattern, you actually learn how to change. In my seminars, I teach that there are 6 basic steps to executing any change in your life. They are awareness, becoming conscious of the pattern or issue. 2, acknowledgement, admitting that you need to release the pattern. 3, choice, actively selecting to release the pattern. 4, strategy, creating a realistic plan. 5, commitment, taking action aided by external accountability. 6, celebration, rewarding yourself for succeeding. No lasting change can be made, nor any pattern released permanently without going through each one of these steps. In order to facilitate your process of change, you will need to learn the lessons of awareness, willingness, casuality, and patience. Once you master these, you will most likely find the challenge of identifying and releasing your patterns far less intimidating. Awareness. Only that day dawns to which we are awake. Henry David Thoreau. Awareness is a process of becoming fully conscious. Awareness can trickle into the corners of your mind slowly as you clean out the cobwebs, or it can dawn suddenly the moment you become cognizant of your patterns and begin to see yourself objectively. However it is attained, it is like a light bulb being switched on that illuminates the dark pockets of your unconscious mind. It is the first step to facilitating any change you wish to make in yourself. Cultivating awareness is a lifelong process. Every moment presents you with the opportunity to remain awake or to slip into unconscious behavior. We can walk through life on automatic pilot, or we can pay attention and behave in a conscious manner. The key to learning awareness lies in tracing the root of your behaviors so you can identify the beliefs that causes you to repeat the same patterns. Once you identify the patterns, you can then work on releasing them through willingness. The opportunity to learn the lesson of awareness is presented each time you feel a sense of discontent in your life. With every desire for a shift in your path or vision of something different comes a chance to look within and ask yourself, what is the truth of what I want? What change do I want to make? The answer that arises to those questions will provide you with the awareness you need to move forward in your process of change. There are countless ways to awaken. Paying attention to your feelings is the easiest way to get in touch with your inner imaginations. Feelings are the lights on the dashboard of life. When one is illuminated, you can be sure it is a signal of some internal issue that needs to be addressed. Simply noticing your behavior can bring you to awareness. When you observe your actions as an objective spectator, you remove the filter of self-judgment and allow yourself to see the patterns that you are repeating. As you watch yourself in a variety of situations and notice similar actions and reactions, you bring to light the common thread attached to the necessary lesson. Tools like meditation, journal writing, personal coaching, and therapy help many learn awareness. For others, simply posting meaningful reminders on the bathroom mirror works. For me, surrounding myself with others who are on their path and live in a conscious way is the best way to stay awake. Since lessons are repeated until learned, and since you cannot learn lessons until you become aware of them, it makes sense that you will need to cultivate awareness if you are to ever progress from where you are right now on your path. Ask yourself what patterns you are repeating. You might be surprised to see how evident they were all along. Willingness. Life doesn't require that we be the best, only that we try our best. H. Jackson Brown Jr. The real secret to being able to change is the willingness to do so. If you are to make any progress at all in excavating yourself from the cycles that entrap you, you must first identify the patterns that keep you stuck. Then you can begin to release the old behaviors. If you truly want to change, you will choose to do it and make a commitment to the process of it. However, if you rely on the thought that you should change, you will make the decision to do so, and then you will feel the pinch of sacrifice. Following the current trends, the advice of friends, or the wishes of family members results in decisions. Following your inner compass results in choice. Perhaps a change you wish to make is to stop smoking. If you truly want to stop, then you choose to do so. And you make a commitment to quitting. However, if you just have the nagging feeling that you should quit, you might then decide to do so and thus end up feeling like you are making a sacrifice by quitting. Or perhaps you think you need to begin an exercise regime. If you truly want to do this because you want to become healthier or more fit, then you will viscerally make the choice to do so, and you will have a much easier time making a commitment to your new routine. However, if you think you should exercise to look or feel better, you will most likely decide to do so somewhat half-heartedly and thus feel like you're making a sacrifice each time you try to exercise. Remember, want leads to choice, which leads to commitment. Should leads to decision, which leads to sacrifice. Whenever I think of the lessons of willingness, I think of a woman named Karen who came to one of my time management workshops. Karen was an incredibly busy person who ran around all the time trying to catch up on all the things she had to do. Between her errands, phone calls, hectic job, and social obligations, Karen was always on the run and never on time for anything. Karen's family began to get angry that she rarely had time for them, and that when she did make time, she would show up nearly an hour late. Her boss admonished her repeatedly for arriving late to work. Her friends felt ignored and annoyed that she could not even send their birthday cards on time. The pressure on Karen to change her ways was enormous, so she decided to work on managing her time better. Karen did improve her habits for about a week. She tried to organize her time better so that everyone in her life would be happy, but she overlooked one essential fact. She really did not want to change. She was not willing to give up the adrenaline rush she got from running around all the time. She enjoyed feeling needed in many different places at once. Giving that up felt like a sacrifice to her. Karen's effort to change fell short, and she ultimately reverted to her old patterns. By the time Karen came to the workshop, several months after her aborted attempt to change, she was physically exhausted and emotionally drained. She herself could no longer tolerate living the way she had been living. Karen admitted she needed to change, not for anyone else's sake, but for her own sanity. Karen was willing to change and thus chose to do so. She no longer wanted to miss the first hour of every family dinner or have to sneak in the back door of her office building in the morning. It was her willingness that allowed her to commit to a more manageable schedule and eventually get her life under control. The next time you're struggling to make a change in your life, ask yourself, how willingly am I really to make this change? If you are not succeeding, there's a good chance that you may be relying on your belief that you should change, rather than on your intrinsic desire to do so. Casuality. To every action there is always opposed and equal reaction. Sir Isaac Newton. Casuality is the acknowledgement that you are the source of your manifestations. In other that you attract into your life is coming to you because of something you are projecting out into the world, and you are therefore responsible for drawing to you all of your circumstances. It's difficult to give up the idea that circumstances just happen to you as opposed to because of you or your behavior. By remaining an innocent victim of fate, you do not have to acknowledge that you are in any way responsible for what befalls you, and you can continue to hide deep within the vortex of your patterns. Think back to my friend, the perfectionist, who consistently attracted the sloppy man into her life. As she and I discussed her pattern, she began to consider the possibility that she was projecting something out into the world that was attracting these men. Perhaps it was that she was so well put together and groomed that they gravitated toward her so that she could reinforce their identity as slobs by comparison. Or perhaps it was simply an issue of chemistry. Regardless of what energy it was that drew these men into her life, she ultimately needed to own up to the fact that she was the cause of her circumstances. Or let's look at Andrew, a chef who had gotten fired from 4 different restaurants for inappropriate behavior. In each case, he claimed that the management of the restaurant was to blame. He either said he had been victimized by the management set up by his boss, or not told exactly what it was he was supposed to do. What Andrew needed to look at, however, was the behavior that he was repeating over and over that was causing the pattern to perpetrate. This is not to say that each firing was entirely his fault. It just seems highly unlikely that 4 different restaurants could have the same issue with him without there being some truth to it. Andrew needed to learn that he played a role in creating his circumstances. Then, and only then, could he begin to see his pattern and work to release it. Patience. Be patient. You will know when it's time for you to wake up and move ahead. Ram Dass. Patience is a display of tolerance. While awaiting an outcome, you are presented with a lesson of patience the moment you try to create a change within yourself. You expect immediate results and are often disappointed when your first few attempts to follow through fall short. When people who try to lose weight cheat on their diets, they get very frustrated with themselves for not being able to stay with their new eating regimen and berate themselves for not changing their patterns. As you already know, change is rarely easy, and you need to exercise gentleness and patience with yourself as you work your way through this process. Growth can be a slow, painstaking process, and patience will provide you with the stamina you need to become the person you want to be. If you absolutely hate getting stuck in traffic, chances are you need a little work in the area of patience. And chances are you will probably get stuck in more traffic jams than someone who has no issue with patience. And not simply because the universe has a sense of humor. You will just notice the traffic more than someone who has no issue with it. Remember, a lesson will be repeated until learned. It just takes a little patience. Alright guys, thank you so much for hanging in there with me, guys. Yes, we are done with, I believe this is part 3. Yeah, so next time, part 4, we're gonna pick up where we're video.